Today I'm speaking with Jade Spoonemore. Jade, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And Jade is a fellow YouTuber. Her YouTube channel is Jaded Atheist, and I'll have the link beneath our video, so please go check her out, like and subscribe, and watch her stuff. And Jade is also, she works at a cryptocurrency company. That's really interesting. Are you an investor yourself yet?
Yes, yes, it's kind of hard to work in it and not invest when you see everyone making money around you.
Gotcha. Well, I'm curious, do you focus more on long-term investing, or are you more in the, like, what you might call a day trader's mentality, where you're maybe in and out every day, or a swing trader where you're in and out every week or two?
More long-term investing. I don't have time to look at cryptocurrency day by day or any stocks day by day. So I'm more long-term holding, but the company I work for automatically runs your assets, so
Okay.
it can rebalance and buy more for you.
Gotcha. So
So I
dollar
kind of
cost averaging.
hold but keep buying more, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Kind of call it dollar cost averaging, where you just put a little bit
Yep.
in every paycheck. And you're in South Dakota.
Yes.
That's really cool. I've been through there once before. That's a beautiful state. I drove through it by myself and was just the angst of being like, I want to stop every 10 minutes and take pictures. It was so beautiful. What's it like living in South Dakota, and what are your favorite places to visit?
Um, it is a beautiful state. Um, Mount Rushmore is gorgeous. Well, anywhere in the Black Hills actually are probably my favorite places to go. They have the mountains and so many tourist places that you can go see. Deadwood is over there, so like gambling and old towns. That's they kind of have that all set up. And but living here, I we have extreme weather. So one day it'll be snowing and 20 degrees, and then the next day it'll be 80 degrees, and the humidity makes it 95, and you're dying. So it fluctuates so much, especially in spring and fall. We'll have our heater on in the morning and our air conditioner on at night. It's that part's kind of hard. Uh, and then we also live in an extremely conservative state and have just about the worst governor in the country, I think. Kristi Noem, I don't know if you've heard of her, but uh, she's terrible. So
Hmm.
living here, I don't know that wise, but it is beautiful. And I do enjoy, we are a more, uh, our state, like our towns are farther apart. So it is small town living, and you definitely have your small towns. I grew up in a town called Canastota, which had like 200 people in it.
Hmm.
And the closest town to us was 45 miles away. So that part of life was kind of fun. I did enjoy the small quietness. And then when I moved to a bigger town like Sioux Falls, which still is a small city, I enjoy the lifestyle, but sometimes I do miss the quiet.
Yeah, I could imagine. I would imagine too, your winters can be pretty intense some years.
They can be, yes. Especially when I was a kid, I remember we would get snowed in for like weeks at a time when we lived out in the country, because the snow was so bad and they didn't come plow out in the country. So I would miss a week of school while the city's kids were still going to school just because nobody could get to me. Um,
Hmm.
but we don't have snowstorms quite that bad anymore. As I got older, the snow became less and less, and now it just gets cold, and our wind chill makes it like negative 20 degrees, and
Hmm.
that's terrible.
Wow. Well, I'm over here in Hotland, as they call it. So we have the opposite most years, not all the time, but we have occasional storms that are pretty bad, but usually it's pretty warm here. Well, I wanted to jump into your story with you. So you have a little different story than a lot of people that I interview, and I'm really curious to hear some of the details. So could you take us back to where your journey started from in terms of your exposure to Christianity? What were the main influences in your life that led you to a Christian worldview and a Christian belief system, and just what were the kind of the earliest memories you have of being exposed to the Bible and to the stories about Jesus?
Yeah. um, so my parents were both alcoholics and drug addicts when me and my sister were little. And so
Hmm.
we grew up in a home where I took care of my sister. I was like 2 years old and she was a little bit younger. And I'm sure that's just the earliest stories that I've heard. I'm sure even as we were babies, there was neglect. But they would leave us for weekends and go party, and they wouldn't even remember that we were at home. And so I would take care of my sister, or my grandparents would take care of us. And it got to the point where my grandparents were threatening to get custody of me and my sister. And they hired a lawyer and were actively pursuing this. So my mom decided it was finally time to get clean. And she asked my grandma for help. And my grandma, being a fundamental Baptist Christian, put her in a Christian rehab center. And my mom made the steps to get clean, but was told the whole way through that it was God helping her. And so she strongly attributed getting clean to God. And so that kind of is what started my exposure to the church, because after that, my mom felt she kind of owed her life to God. And my grandma was reinforcing that thought. And then she also was telling her how important it was that me and my sister grew up in the church. So from the time I was 5 up, we were actively participating in church.
Had your mom already been a believer of some, professing at some sort before then, or was that when she actually came to make a profession of faith?
So she grew up in a Christian home too. My grandma has been a fundamental Baptist Christian as far as I understand her whole life. So my mom was raised in that as well. But she had a rough childhood, and my grandpa was not always a Christian, and he was an ex-military person, and he had an alcohol problem. And so him and my mom really did not get along, and there was a lot of hurt and abuse there. And so she kind of was angry with God and walked away from her faith. And that's when she got into drugs, and she met my dad, and she went down this wrong path that my grandma shamed her for all the time, until she got clean. And as soon as my mom got clean and started living a Christian lifestyle again, my grandma was happy and was willing to help her and accept her and be there for her again, because you can't be there when they're living a bad lifestyle, because then you're encouraging it, is my grandma's mentality, which led to a lot of situations in my life being treated that way later on. So my mom started bringing us to church all of the time, and my dad followed in her footsteps because he didn't want to lose me and my sister either, and he realized that he needed to make a lifestyle change. So he went to Alcoholics Anonymous and got clean, and has now been sober for 26 or 22 years, I think. So he's doing phenomenal. And he started going to church with us too, because Alcoholics Anonymous is also a more religious based program. You do attribute getting clean to God and stuff like that. So
they have a lot of messages too about being helpless, right? Where you can't do it in and of yourself. You need a higher power to pull you out.
Yep. And it's more of an emphasis on a higher power than God. But my dad, because my mom was going to church, kind of filled in that higher power with God for a short while. Anyways, so he started going to church with us, and I mean, honestly, it was great. We went to church. We were a whole family. I felt like everyone else in the church. And the first church that we went to was a very small Baptist church. And
did it have red bricks? Was it made of red bricks?
It was pink. It was like light pink.
Interesting. Over here in Georgia, chances are good if you see a church and it's red brick, 9 times out of 10, I think it's Baptist and maybe even, Southern Baptist or Conservative Baptist, Fundamental Independent, King James only Baptist. Not all. I'm sure there's some Presbyterian churches that use red bricks, but it's funny how many times if we've kind of made it like a joke, like, yeah, as a church, I wonder what kind it is, and if it's red brick, it's usually Baptist.
That is funny. Here we put churches in old buildings, so a lot of our churches aren't in actual church buildings. They're just buildings that were closed down that they rented out for a church. So I actually went to a church in an old school for a while because the school had moved to a different building. So until they tore it down, we did our church service in there. And then we moved to an office building for a while because we didn't have anywhere to go. And then we moved into an old JDC building. So, and that's where that church finished their moving. But yeah.
And when you were in that church and churches like it as a child, do you remember what their main messages were? Like what they were saying was what the Bible was all about?
Oh yeah. So we went to several different. The first one that we started in, that my dad went to, was a Baptist church. But so the reason we left that church was because they started having women go up to the front and like convulsing on the stage, and then my pastor would touch their forehead and they'd fall down and start convulsing even more. And my mom was like, yeah, this is okay.
Is that what they call slaying in the spirit?
I think so. Now I know that. At the time, my mom was like, I have no idea what's going on. We're leaving. And also in that church, so for my parents, really shouldn't have ever been together. They got together because they had me and my sister, and my grandma pressured them into, you should be married because that's what God wants. And so it's this idea of you've had sex, you've had children, now you have to be married. There's no choice. My parents got married, and they wanted to make it work for me and my sister. And while I appreciate that, now I wish they hadn't, but anyways, so my dad started, my mom and dad fought a lot. And there was a short period of time that my dad stopped going to church with us because he and my mom split up. And during that time, there was a guy in the church who was involved in children's ministry. So me and my sister already really liked him because he was one of our youth group leaders or whatever. And me and my sister were 5 and 7 at this time. As soon as my parents split up, it was very well known because my dad wasn't going to church with us anymore. And this guy started paying my mom a lot of attention. And in that process, he also would pay me and my sister a lot of attention. And the church thought, looking outside of it, it's, oh, he's trying to get the kids to like him too. That's what you do. Turns out he was a pedophile. And thank goodness my parents got back together very shortly after he started trying to get my mom's attention, because my dad was like, wait, no, that's my wife. They got back together, and this man turned to a lady who had just lost her husband in a car accident, who also had 2 little girls. They ended up getting married, and he abused the children. And it happened to many of the children in that church, unfortunately, because he was the youth group leader. He was around all of us. And so that started my anger towards churches covering up abuse, which also goes on in my story. So we left that church. And then
just to clarify before you go into the next part of it, would you have called yourself a Christian at that point? Like, was there a time where you said, I believe such and such?
So yes, I was very active in my youth group or children's ministry at this time. And we were in church all the time. We were constantly, even outside of church time, we were hanging out with these people. We were constantly talking about God. My mom was always talking about it at home. So even though I didn't understand it at this time, because I think I was 7, I called myself a Christian, and I really believed that God was real. I had years already of being told that God loves me and Jesus is real and VBSs and all this stuff. So I didn't understand it, but I did believe that he was genuinely real. And the fact that my dad and my mom both believed it too made it even more real in my mind. And at this time, my dad did still believe in Christianity. It wasn't until we started leaving this church that he started questioning his faith as well.
And about what age was this that you're referring to in your story?
I was 7,
okay.
And he was like almost 30 probably.
Gotcha. So you were old enough to understand at least the idea that you had a sin issue between you and God, yes, and that Jesus was the Savior figure.
Yep. And I was actually baptized by this point. I knew enough to understand that I needed to ask Jesus to come into my heart because I was a dirty, horrible sinner at 7 years old. And so I did the baptism thing. We had to meet with our pastor to explain, this is what I understand I'm doing, because you're not supposed to get baptized without having an understanding of what asking Jesus into your heart does. So I needed to tell him, I know that Jesus came and died on the cross for my sins, and now I do this to ask him to forgive my sins and say that I'm going to live my life with him, and I'm asking him in my heart. And as long as you give a satisfactory answer, you get to be baptized. So I was baptized, and I was so proud of that. And I felt like, yes, I'm on the right path. And throughout my my whole childhood, that's how it was. I listened to what I needed to do to be a good Christian, and I did it. And I took that to heart. Like, this is what the Bible says. This is what I'm doing. And so I always felt like I fully lived up to what the Bible said throughout my whole childhood. So when things continued to go wrong and life wasn't going the way that I thought, and all these bad things were happening to me, I was, what the heck? I'm doing what you're telling me to do, and yet I'm living such a horrible life. This doesn't make sense. So there was definitely lots of questions kind of throughout my whole life as to why, if God is so loving and I'm doing everything you're asking me to do, why does my life suck?
Yeah. Before you move on from the 7-year-old stage of the story, just one more question. Would your churches have told you that if you didn't believe, you would, if you died without Christ as your Savior, you would have gone to hell?
Yes.
And I assume being it was a Baptist church, that probably that was a literal torture of burning fire.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yep. Hell was literal, and you would go if you did not accept him, no matter what your age. Or no, that's false. As soon as you could understand by looking around you that there was a God, then you were responsible for accepting him. Gotcha. Which could be different, I guess, for every child. But yeah. And then if you didn't, you would go to a literal hell. So I was definitely terrified of hell as a child. And like, they don't gloss it over either. They tell you at 7 years old, you're going to go to hell and you're going to burn, and it's going to be, you're going to be tortured and you're going to choke on smoke. And they go into detail about how horrible hell is and totally scare the crap out of you, and then say, but if you follow these steps, you'll get to go to heaven, and heaven's this amazing place. And I was like, all right, well, I don't want to go to hell, so I'm going to do these steps. I was terrified of hell.
Well, we're talking about things that can be scary to some people, either at that age or as you got a little bit older. Did you get exposed to the idea of what's called the rapture, or being left behind?
Yep.
Did you see that as like a source of like the pride of like, I know that I'm on the good side. I know that, I'm going to get to be with the Lord, and he's going to protect me, and I'm with him. or was it ever like a fearful thing? Like some people I've spoken with have said, I knew I was a Christian, but sometimes I struggle with sin where I'd be like, whether it's a little sin, where you just you did something that is more between you and God, or something more blatant like you talk back to your mom, or something really bad like you had a lustful thought. But whatever it is, if you struggle with it, where you're like, man, I'm not putting that sin to bed, it's not, it's just, it keeps on coming up, that maybe that's an evidence that you're not really saved. And so they would begin to wonder, wow, if there's a rapture coming and those that are left behind will be going through the tribulation, maybe I'll be actually part of the tribulation and maybe I'm not saved. And, the question, will it be hard for me to get saved in the tribulation? Can I still get saved then? And did that fear come up, or were you confident in that stage that that was not an issue for you?
No, that definitely did. I felt my whole, well, probably once I got a little bit older, I felt the whole time that I was kind of faking everything just because I wasn't, like, I had a relationship with God. I felt that it was real, but I wasn't having all of these same experiences that my mom was talking about, like of the Lord speaking to her and stuff like that. So I was definitely worried that even though I was doing these things, maybe because Satan is such a deceiver, maybe I was deceived in what I had been doing so far, and I hadn't actually gotten to that place of fully accepting God. Or, I could have done something that I didn't remember, and that could have condemned me to hell. And so I was scared of, I was scared of dying, period, whether it was natural or in the rapture, because I couldn't grasp the concept of being outside of my body. That didn't make sense to me. So the idea that I was going to die and either go to hell or go to heaven, either way, scared me because I didn't understand how that could be possible. And I couldn't comprehend what even being in heaven outside of my body would be like. And that was terrifying. I remember as a kid thinking, what if I die and I leave my body, but like I don't see it anymore? Like I somehow, for some reason, can't experience what's going on anymore. And that scared me. And there was just so much fear around dying and the rapture. And then I also had dreams that my family would interpret as prophetic dreams.
Hmm.
And the stupidest things would give them the idea that I was lying about being a Christian. And so then they would question me, are you sure you've asked God into your heart? Are you sure you've done all these things? And that just reinforced maybe I'm not really a Christian. Maybe I am deceived. So it was constantly me questioning my own reality almost. And that was scary too.
That's interesting. I've not had that quite that experience, that background to that extent, but I did have a pastor once, or I should say an elder, a preaching elder of a church once asked me stuff like, do you hear the voice of God? And, what has he been saying to you recently? And just the shock of, like, I knew it was real to me that I had a relationship with Christ, but the fact that I didn't have his experience, like you're saying, your mom's experience, it was different. It makes you question. And there's a lot of different varieties of that, a lot of flavors that come out. But this whole sense of, there's Christians, even not just experientially speaking, but just doctrinally. Like, if you're a Christian that really loves the Bible, then obviously you're going to be a Calvinist. You're going to believe God elects people to salvation because that's what the Bible teaches. And you got, some other group that focuses on some other aspect. And then you have other people that are really focused now more on what you might call a liberal Christianity or a progressive Christianity. And they're like, look, if you can't, you know, love Jesus but condemn the genocide of the Old Testament, you don't get it. Like, that's not what the Bible is about. And so they're landing on a very different Christianity. And everyone's like putting this standard up of, like, if you're really following Christ, like, he's going to lead you in a certain path to truth. He's going to, Spirit wants to guide you into truth, and he wants to communicate to you how to live and how to be in a, communion with God. And then when you have all these different versions of that, you're like, well, what does it look like? And people say, well, according to the Bible, let every man be convinced in his own mind. But it's like, at some point, if God's not the author of confusion, which the Bible says, then why is it so darn confusing? And obviously there's some fringe stuff like, oh, Ultra King James kind of thing, but even just in the more in the mainstream Christianity, it can be intimidating for people, especially if you add into it the struggle with sin. Like, let's say you're talking to a girl that's struggling with sleeping around or something, or a guy that's struggling with pornography, or someone else that's struggling with their language. Like, I just want to cuss all the time. And you add into that mix, like, you're already kind of questioning, am I as real and genuine as this person? And now I'm struggling with sin, man. I can't stop this, even though I think I'm praying and I think I'm asking God to take it away, but I'm not really seeing any victory. And then if you have any sense of just natural lack of joy, like you're either naturally depressed or just things aren't going well, you lost the job, you're not healthy, you're like, man, where's the joy of the Lord? It says the joy of the Lord is going to be my strength. I don't feel any joy. I don't feel any presence. And it puts you in this kind of cycle and tailspin of like, what's wrong with me? And so you're already starting with that. Like, you're a sinner. What's wrong with you is you're in Adam. You're broken. You're worthless. All your righteousness is like a filthy rag, and no one's done good. No, not one. But on top of that, now you're adding into it this, from the condemnation that we all face as being in Adam, judicially judged, that now you're also like, what's wrong with me? Like, why can't I have this joy of the Lord stuff? And it can be very intimidating, and especially if you get into some of the fringe stuff with the what I would label charismatic or Pentecostal. If you really think that's real Christianity and that's it, like, what, I need to speak in tongues. I gotta speak in tongues.
Yeah.
And if you don't speak in tongues, there's definitely something wrong with you. That kind of stuff can tear people apart.
Yes. Yep. And yeah, that's exactly what I experienced.
So what happened next if your 7-year-old part of the
Yeah.
story where your dad moved? Your dad, was he still a Christian, you said, at that point?
Yep. So when we were leaving that church, my dad still identified as a Christian, but we started going to my grandma's Baptist church. And
The one who helped your mom?
yep,
Okay.
yep. And that is a just fundamental church. So they were, teaching that homosexuality is wrong and we need to kill these people. And
like actually,
yeah, actually, the government should be taking care of them because that's what the Bible says.
which it does. It absolutely does.
Yes. Yep. And and that's the thing. Like, they were saying all these things and backing it up with the Bible. So all of these really toxic ideas I was seeing in the Word, and I believed that the Word was the inherent Word of God, and that's what I had to live in order to go to heaven. And ultimately, for me as a child, it was, I don't want to go to hell. Like, that was the ultimate motivation for me to be a Christian, is I do not want to go to hell. This sounds like a horrible place. I don't want to be there. And so even though I did believe in God, I had a relationship with him and all these things, my main motivation for continuing to follow and believe and actively live my life this way was to not go to hell. So we started going to this church, and my dad really had an issue with the things that they were teaching. And so he started looking into religion on his own. And he found Seth Andrews and Aaron Ra, and that destroyed religion for him. It didn't take him very long. He spent probably 2 years questioning his faith and looking into things. But as soon as he found, especially Aaron Ra, and started listening to his videos on evolution, because we were raised young Earth creationists, so we believed that the Earth was only 6,000 years old, and we lived with dinosaurs and all these things. He realized that was absolutely not true. And so he started slowly withdrawing from the church things that we were doing. He stopped going to church with us as often. He would have excuses as to why he didn't want to go. He was tired, which my dad was a self-contractor, so he was constantly working, and he was always tired. So it worked, for a while. And then it finally got to the point where he had to say, I don't believe this. And that was, I was probably 8 or 9 when that happened.
And you knew that he was making that transition. That was
Yep.
clear.
Yep. I knew because my mom made such a big deal about it, because she believed that, God wrote in our heart that he is real. And we all know, if you don't know, you're choosing to ignore what God has put all around you. And so you can't, in her mind and in my grandma's mind, you couldn't not believe in a God. That's not an option. You're either you're living your life for him, or you're angry at him. So they considered him a Satanist, and they told me and my sister that that was the path that he was taking, and so we were very concerned for him. I was convinced 100% that my dad was going to hell, that he was following Satan, and that it was now my duty to bring him back to God, because that's what the Bible said, that's what my mom said, that's what my grandma said, that's what everyone in my church was saying. Like, you have to live a lifestyle that will bring him back. And so at 9 years old, that's a lot of pressure. Now I have to live a perfect lifestyle so that my dad can see Christ in me. And I'm constantly worried about him because I think he's going to hell, and I think that he's worshiping Satan, which in my mind is a terrible thing. And so it really strained my relationship with my dad.
Can I just interject for a second?
Yeah.
This one point is so critical. I'd love to at some point do a whole series of commentaries on this one point. But just to keep it short, this is so critical. Same thing happened to me when I escaped. Some of my closest loved ones described it this way, and it's a little bit different, but I'm sure you'd agree that it was a similar dynamic. They said, what you're trying to do is basically like you came home and said, hey, I discovered heroin is so amazing. It's so good to be addicted to this drug, and you all should be too. And they said, you've chosen a path of utter destruction, and you want us to think of it as good and applaud it, or at least accept it in some way. And like, we're not going to accept this. If someone came into our house and said heroin is wonderful and you all should do it too, we would say, of course not. This is a toxic idea. You're going to make us really unhealthy really fast. And atheism is like the same thing to them. Like, you there's no room for, there might be a different story. And that dynamic threatens and makes people really afraid to speak. I mean, it's I don't want to compare different apples to oranges here, but when you look at someone who is perhaps like a homosexual who is afraid to say it, the whole coming out issue, and we're all know to be respectful and let people come out when they want to, how they want to whom they want to, but we know that whenever that happens, that is a fearful thing. You can get that sense of like, wow, this could go a bunch of different ways, and people could literally cut you off over it. They could write you off. They could look down on you. And the way that people come out of Christianity is very, very similar in the sense that that the minute you say anything like maybe the Bible's not true, even if you don't even say atheist, just if you say, I'm going to tread really gently here, just say, I don't know if the Bible's inerrant. I'm not sure, but evolution might be true. And I know there's liberal Christians who would say, no, that's not a big deal. But talking more about our background, which is similar enough, conservative Christians, maybe evolution's true. Maybe the earth is very old. Maybe this story isn't quite what we thought it was. Maybe some of this is a parable. Maybe it's something different. Maybe there's more to this. Maybe it's a copy of some other religious stuff that was already out there at that time in Second Temple Judaism. Anything that looks like you're threatening the party line, that says maybe this isn't true. Maybe there's something more here that we didn't know. And maybe I can live my life very, very happily and gladly and morally and joyfully without Christianity, without this God story. And especially if you take it a little bit more aggressively and say, I'm not comfortable with what the Bible teaches. Like, you just, instead of saying, I'm just questioning it, I'm not sure where this lands, where I'm going to go with this, but I'm just asking some good questions, just so you'll know. I'm weirded out by the fact that there's discrepancies. Why does Jesus in one gospel cleanse the temple in the beginning of this ministry? Why does it the other one say he cleanses it at the end? And we know that it was like several football fields big, and there was a whole, whatever galleon of Roman soldiers just for that purpose, to stop anyone that tried to disrupt the marketplace. They would have put him in jail or killed him in a second. How does he do it knowing that you can't do it? How does he do it once and then again? And then, Gospels, one of them says he's been around for 3 years before his crucifixion. Another one says he's only been around for 1 year before he's crucified, meaning he's only doing a public ministry. So you start to get weirded out. And that's like enough to creep some Christians out. Like, why are you questioning this? God wrote this. It's clearly perfect. But if you go further and say, well, it says that he wipes out people, like kills moms and dads and little boys and babies, but you can keep the young girls if they're virgins for, child brides or worse, maybe. You start to say, oh, I'm not comfortable with this Yahweh character. What you're doing behind the scenes is you're saying, this is Christianity. I should say what I'm about to describe first is what you're doing before you step away from it. You're in Christianity, and Christ is your identity. Like, I am in Christ. Christ is in me. I am sealed for the day of redemption. I am a Christian. I am absolutely a Christian. And my identity, the Spirit lives in me. You can't separate them anymore. Like, I am part of Christ. And so when you look at me, Christ is in me. My worldview is through the lens no more of myself. Myself is just my sin. It's through the lens of the Bible and through Christ, through God. And what you do when you start to just a little digging, a little deconstructing, no matter where it lands, you're saying, okay, Christianity it used to be this, and I'm inside of it, or we're merged together. But now there's a Christianity, and I'm separate from it. I'm analyzing it, and that is threatening to people to say it might be outside of you. And then the other part that's really threatening to people is to say, you always would say God is the judge. God judges us. He tells us what to think, what to believe. He's in charge. And all of a sudden, you as a thinking person are now saying, I think I want to judge this book. You're setting yourself up as the judge and saying, maybe this is wrong. And you have to question yourself, and you're like, can I say that? Am I allowed to say that genocide is wrong if it's God that commands it? Am I allowed to say that, child brides is wrong if God commands it? Stealing land, is that wrong if God commands it? And it's a hard pill to swallow, even for yourself, even if you don't tell anybody. But the idea that everyone else around you is going to say, you're a traitor. You're a traitor. You have stood up against the living God, and it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. You have stood up as the judge and jury and executioner of this book. You cannot condemn this book. This book will condemn you. This God will condemn you. Get in your place. Jesus is Lord, and you will bow your knee either now or later, one way or the other, in heaven or in hell. You will bow your knee to Jesus and to the Word of God. And in that context, most people can't even imagine bucking the system. And the repercussions of people attacking you over it, traitor, 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 it's overwhelming. And for a lot of people, they just don't have the power to speak up. So I just want to say kudos to your dad for being willing to take such a big, brave leap. It's hard.
Yeah, I have become more and more amazed by my dad as I've gotten older and looked back at this situation. He put up with a lot. My mom's side of the family are all fundamental Baptist Christians and all believe the same way. And they were not nice to him when he came out as atheist. Because of the way that they treated him and because of the way that my mom and grandma talked to me about him, I was not very nice to him for a while either. And I have since apologized, and me and my dad are amazing now. But I was very arrogant, and he would try to, I would try to talk to him about God, to evangelize to him and bring him back, and he would try very calmly to ask me not to talk about these things because my mom asked him not to. And he wanted to respect her wishes on that. And, he knew that, especially for me, I think his relationship with my sister was different, but especially for me, I was so into my religion, and it was who I was, like you said. There was no separating Christ and me. That's who I was, and he knew that. So anytime he would try to talk to me about something, I wouldn't even listen to him, really. It was kind of this, I'm just closing my ears and I'm going to speak the Bible to you while I don't listen to you. And that's what it was.
Do you know if anyone did ask him for his reasons? Like, did anyone that you were aware of come to him and say, what did you learn that apparently was so valuable that you were willing to leave this?
Not anybody in our family, no. Anyone in our family didn't really care. And, actually, now that I think about it, I don't know that I even have asked him since then. And I am curious about that. I actually want to have him on my channel sometime to talk about these things, but it kind of makes me sad thinking about the way that I treated him sometimes. So I don't know, but I think it was, as far as I understand, it was a lot of the way that the Bible, I mean, the same issues that a lot of other people have. And he didn't agree with the morals that were taught in the Bible. So he didn't agree that good morals came from the Bible. And then once he found out that evolution was real, I feel like that's kind of a thing for a lot of people, especially if you're raised as a young earth creationist. When you find out that evolution is real, it's kind of like this, oh my gosh, I've been so duped by this.
Yes.
That you kind of realize you've been duped by everything, I feel like, and it's okay, none of this is real. And I think that's kind of the experience that my dad had as well, once he realized, that evolution is real and he didn't agree with the morals taught in the Bible. And I do remember that he was looking at many different religions for a while. I think he was trying to figure out what he did believe for those 2 years, and then he landed on atheism because he realized that all of these religions were man-made, and he fully, adamantly believes that still. So once you really start looking into these things, it's kind of hard not to. Well, I guess that's not true, because there are Christians who look into it and still stay Christian. But when you're questioning and you realize that some of the things that you were led to believe by not being taught about it was real, it's easier to realize everything else is.
I think too, a lot of it comes down to just an open-mindedness to have a scope for the imagination of what could have happened historically to cause Christianity to appear on the stage of the planet, especially at that time. Second Temple Judaism, all the different influences that were happening. Certainly the Greco-Roman ones, the Egyptian ones that have been around for much longer. So many influences that were happening, and especially just it was like a boiling pot around that time of all of these things. Certainly a lot of stuff with Enoch and the Qumran community, the Dead Sea Scrolls, all this stuff going on. Just it's apocalyptic messianism that they just all these things. But I think it's hard for me. I completely agree that there are some Christians that have looked into it and said, I still believe. I don't see anything here that threatens my faith. What frustrates me is that a lot of them, what they've done is they've gone about an inch deep and acted like they have enough. They're like, well, I listened to so-and-so apologist, and they said there's no real comparison between Jesus and Dionysius, so I guess there's not. There's no real similarity between Jesus and Mithras, so I guess there's not. There's no similarity between, all these things. And, the Greco-Roman mystery cults were so different, and Christianity was, something completely other, and certainly not borrowing from them and copying them in any way. And you get the sense of that there's still so much more information they're not willing to look at. And one of the biggest ones to me is just, it's such a telltale issue in my heart, is where did the actual New Testament come from in the sense of like who wrote it and what were they using to write it. And when you start digging in and you find out that they copied huge chunks of Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, Euripides' Bacchae, Virgil, so many other Greek poets and philosophers, when you realize that they're quoting 100 times from the book of Enoch, dozens of times from Jubilees, over and over. And that's, it could go on for 20 minutes about what they're quoting from. That's one of my big projects. But like once you realize it, you're like, how are you defending Christianity? And we're like, did you actually dig deep enough to find that, Mr. Christian, Mrs. Christian? Did you actually dig deep enough? And can you tell me why, when you see Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount, you think he's just saying something lovely? Why is it that he's actually quoting the Qumran community scrolls, or the War Scroll, or the Song of Sabbath Sacrifice, or the Holocaust scroll? Like, why is he quoting this stuff? Why is he quoting Enoch? Especially Jesus. Like, what you think it's it's Jesus, it's Enoch, and you get to a point where most people that I've come across, they do two things. They say, not true. That stuff's not true. Or this is the more interesting side, and I kind of semi-respect this. They'll say, that stuff is true because we dug into it. We did do the research. That means those other books are canonical. Enoch should have never left the canon. Enoch was in the canon for a while and it should have never left. Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, has never left it. No church should have left it. And so they just kind of keep on shifting their story until it all fits again. But for most Christians, it seems like they go an inch deep. And then it does lead, though, and I want to ask you about this, it leads people to say, was I deceived? And should I be angry about this? And I wanted to ask, did you, and I mean, we're jumping ahead and we can jump right back here to your childhood, but did you feel as you got older and you learned this stuff, did you feel deceived, and did it make you angry at all?
Yes. And I am still probably in a little bit of that phase, just because I'm only about a year into being out of religion, and I still almost every day find something that I believed that I realized was based on my religion. Or there are parts of my life that I have kind of blocked out, and I'm working with a counselor to deal with some of those things. And so sometimes they have
years, you mean?
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
And some of those things, while talking through them, or even doing, these interviews and talking to people about my experiences, I've had memories come back. And so trying to process and deal with those as well has been something that is hard and makes me angry. Kids don't have a choice. And I didn't have a choice in what I was raised to believe, and what I was kept from. And, I didn't get to be out in society. I didn't watch the news. I didn't get to listen to things going on today. We listened to 80s stuff. Like, we lived in the past constantly. And so,
Hey, the 80s had some great music.
I mean, they really did, and I'm not mad about it, but
70s were better, but 80s. Yeah.
But there was just so much that I didn't know. And now I'm 28 years old, about to be 29, and I feel like I'm starting over on some things, and that's not fair. I don't think that I should be going through this. And in some ways, I still feel like a kid in some aspects. I was not taught stuff that my 16-year-old knows, because he's taught evolution in school. I'm just learning now how evolution is working, because I didn't get to learn about that. So there definitely is anger in that aspect. I do feel like I was deceived. I felt like I feel like the methods of evidence that I was given as a child has made it so that I was willing to believe anything with no evidence. So, unfortunately, my family is a huge conspiracy family, and I fully believed those things for a long time, because I thought everyone in our world was lying to us to deceive us. So it was so easy to believe these conspiracies as well. I didn't have a good understanding of how you look at evidence, how you look at information, and make an educated decision. So now that's something that I'm learning at 28 years old too. There's all these things that I never would have attributed to being raised as a Christian or being religious, that affected me, that now I do. I've realized, oh yeah, I don't know about this because, and it goes back to the Bible generally, and what my mom was willing to teach us and what she wasn't. There's definitely this idea, if you don't talk about it, it just disappears, or you won't ever ask, or you won't ever try to find out for yourself, or it'll never come up. So don't talk.
Good. What were you going to say there?
Oh, just don't talk about it.
Yeah. And what you're alluding to in many ways is it comes down to indoctrination and brainwashing.
Yeah.
And that, we could certainly give people the benefit of the doubt and say there's a lot of people that just didn't know the information. I mean, even, you could certainly argue the Qumran, Dead Sea Scrolls, all that stuff, that didn't even come out for the last couple of decades. But, Enoch's been around forever. Jubilees has been around forever. So many things have been around for a long, long time. And I went to Bible college, and I know that there's some people, even at high levels of Bible college, that probably don't know the full details. But I also know that there are some really interesting teachers that would read voraciously. They read everything. They just, if they weren't teaching something, they were reading volume after volume of everything. The idea that none of them read Enoch, the idea that none of them read the Apocalypse of Zephaniah, the idea that none of them read Jubilees or the Wisdom of Solomon, I doubt it. I can't believe that none of them ever read that. And if they read it, they would have said, holy smokes, this is Wisdom of Solomon. This is Romans. Enoch, this is the Gospels. This is woven all throughout it. They would have seen it over and over and over, and they would have never been able to say, I didn't see it at that point. They would have had experienced it. And to me, the idea that none of them ever spoke up, that whoever did know, never spoke up. And I understand there's a party line when you're a teacher at a school. You have to stand for what the school stands for. But there's a certain point at which if you're part of a gross deception, if you're part of a party line that's truly keeping people in this 5% information when there's 95% else that needs to be shared, you're part of brainwashing, you're part of indoctrination. And one of the things that's interesting, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I just want to make sure we focus on it too, is the idea that the outsiders are the bad people. You talked about it with your dad, but the world's against us, and our goal is to be countercultural. Did you face that kind of message from your pastors and from your church? Like, we are not here to be hanging on till Jesus comes. We're here to fight. This is a war. This is a battle. Gear up. We're put on the armor of God and make a difference. Fight the world.
Yep. Oh yeah, we were constantly in a fight. I mean, they even made songs about how we're warriors in this fight, and it was always this us versus them. So the government was always trying to control us, and ultimately population control was a part of it, and they were watching us all the time and trying to take away our freedoms because they were anti-Christian. And that's what it is. It's not, same with scientists. Like, scientists aren't trying to actually discover the truth of the world. They're trying to disprove the Bible. So they're looking at evidence and making it so that it doesn't prove what the Bible says, because the world is trying to disprove God. And so it's always this emphasis of everyone is against God and against us. And so it was always sin. Yeah. And then not only that, but we also talked about persecution all the time, because I mean, they constantly brought in missionaries who were talking to us about people overseas who were dying for Christ. They would, this idea of being asked if either if you're a Christian and dying, or being asked to deny God and not doing it and being killed, was almost glorified. Like, that was the ultimate way to die, because you were dying for your faith. And so I remember as a child listening to all these missionaries come in and tell us about these dangerous places that they went and these terrible things that they saw of Christians being killed simply for their faith, and thinking, oh, like, I wish I could do that. That's terrifying. Like, kids should not feel that way ever. Yeah. and so yeah, it's definitely this. I was also told part of the rapture or the end time stuff is you will be killed if you believe in God, and eventually it will be if you believe in Christ, you won't be able to do anything, you won't be able to buy anything, you won't be able to go anywhere. And so it's kind of this constant fear of when is this coming,
Yeah.
as well. So we were doomsday preppers. Um,
Hmm.
we had
Like literally.
plans for the end of the world. We were stocking up on food. My One of my family members was working on building an underground bunker, um,
Oh wow.
figuring out ways to collect rainwater, armed like no other. I think every person on my mom's side of the family has like 20 guns each. It's quite ridiculous. And of course, it's not just, guns that you would need for hunting and handguns to defend yourselves. They have semi automatic rifles and any of the big guns that you can get. They have them. Just because they think it's fun, and they're preparing for defending their property and defending their faith at some point. Like
Hmm.
they're teaching my cousins who range from 4 to 18 that we're going to have to defend our property and defend our rights very soon, especially because they all are on the Trump train, unfortunately. So,
It sounds like it. Yeah, I could easily imagine. What could I ask? What when you were growing up in this, what was evangelism like? Like, were you encouraged to go talk to people and share the gospel yourself? And do you remember any experiences telling people about the death of the Lord?
absolutely. So we didn't stay at the church that my grandma went to for very long, because it was in a richer neighborhood. My grandparents are well off, and so they went to kind of a uppity church, as my mom called it, and it was one of the churches where you had to dress up every Sunday, and your appearance was very important. And my mom didn't really like that because at this time it was just her and me and my sister going to church. We lived, 45 miles outside of where we were going to church. So it was a long drive to church every Sunday. Trying to get us ready was irritating for her. And my mom had a lot of things that she was struggling with from her childhood, that she wasn't dealing with, because also part of uh, the church I grew up in, mental health is not a thing. And if you are struggling with mental health, it's because your walk with God is not where it should be. So if you're struggling, it's something you're doing wrong and you need to figure it out. So my mom never sought help for her mental health, and it showed throughout my whole childhood. She was depressed. She would sleep until noon sometimes. She was never very happy. She didn't want to do things with us very often.
Hmm.
And
That's so
you
sad.
know, now looking back, I totally see what she was going through. But at the time, it was just my mom's always mad and she doesn't want to hang out with us or spend time with us unless we're in church, because then everything's okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Would you say too that
so
they would have said that the mental health issues, that the solution is also basically that you don't need an outside counselor unless they're strictly biblical, but what you really need is the church. You need the
yeah,
pastor, the godly people, the godly elders, and the godly families to come
yeah,
around you. And I remember at Bible college there was a guy who had been really big, and I think let's say his name was Norm something, but anyway, he talked a lot about counseling, and then from what I understand, he actually came out and like pulled himself back from what he'd been doing and said, I think I was wrong here, guys. I've been talking about biblical counseling in the sense of like go to a biblical counselor in their office. He's like, the church is where the truth is. I need to be encouraging people to get to the church. Like the counselor is the Bible. The Bible's your counselor. The Word of God is what changes and transforms your mind, your heart. If you want to be truly a new creature, a new person in Christ, soak yourself in the Word of God. Get surrounded by godly men who can put the Word of God into your heart better. And this idea that you go to the church for your mental health, it's staggering. That I mean, that just that takes indoctrination and brainwashing from childhood when you don't know any better to now you're an adult who's fully voluntarily saying, I know I need help and I'm going to a pastor. I'm going to this book for help. That
Yep.
just blows my mind.
It's it's very, very harmful, because then you're only okay in that situation. So when I was in my most depressed stages in life, I had the same thing. Okay, let's get around these Christian women. Let's get you in Bible studies. Let's we even did a ladies' night at the church, like a sleepover thing. Um, and you find comfort in that, obviously, because you're around people, they're doing things actively to cheer you up. You're having fun on purpose for the purpose of cheering you up. Um, and then you leave that and the problems are still there. The feelings are still there. The fact that my depression is a chemical imbalance in my brain that does not go away without medication, made it so that these moments of happiness, yeah, made me feel better for that time. But as soon as I was out of those situations, I was depressed again, which reinforced this idea of there's something wrong with me. And anytime I tried to talk to my mom and my grandma about it, there's something wrong with you. And there were periods of time where I was on antidepressants back then. But it was always, let's see what we can do to get you off of these. So you'll take them for a little while, you'll start to feel better, and then let's get more vitamin D. Let's pray and read the Bible together. Let's start being active, and we'll get you better and we'll get you off of them. So it's almost this shame of ever needing or ever not feeling okay mentally. Like if I want to have just a lazy day at home because I don't feel good, that's not okay. Being lazy is a sin. So you're ultimately sinning and you can't do that. Sitting at home in bed all day for one day is not okay.
So doing something like antidepressants, was that seen as either sinful or at least unwise or at least
Yep.
unhealthy from a
Yep.
Christian perspective?
Unhealthy.
Okay.
Yep. Medication in general was unhealthy. My mom also believed that doctors were trying to poison us ultimately, and just make money off of us. So and she was an anti-vaxxer and everything. So we only got vaccines that we had to get to go to school, and we did not go to the doctor for much else. She always tried to find natural remedies for things if possible. So antidepressants were absolutely terrible for your body and for your faith. Antidepressants would also limit your relationship with God because you were messing with your brain.
Yeah, kind of probably a similar concept to don't be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. Like don't let anything inhibit your brain, whether it's alcohol or medicine.
Yep.
The Spirit's there to fill you up. But I was just going to share this anecdote really quickly. One of the side effects that sometimes comes into this with these kind of stories, and it hit me really, really hard in life. When I was young, I developed very severe insomnia. It started, in math class when you're just old enough to take a fraction and make it into a decimal, like 3/4 equals 0.75. For some reason, my mind grabbed that. I mean, the hour that I learned that ability, that math, how you could do it on paper. And this is going to sound like I'm some kind of genius. I'm not. It's not a beautiful mind thing. It just is like a very, very minor OCD thing that lasted for about a year. But as soon as I learned to do it, my mind wouldn't stop, and I would do longer and longer fractions, and I could see them in my head as if like I had a paper that I was doing, but it was all in my head. And I began to find all these patterns, like the 1/7, repeats, and it wasn't because I'd written it out. I just did it in my head, but I can still do it. Put 1 4 2 8 5 7 1, like it just repeats and repeats, and I would find all these patterns, and for a year, I couldn't stop doing it, and I couldn't sleep. I'd literally do math facts all night. I'd cry myself to sleep, and after about a year, it stopped, but the insomnia stayed, and it stayed for about 25 years. And there was a pastor who was over me for quite a while. And I remember him talking about the idea that, like, look, God designed the body to work. If your body's not working right, especially if it's a mental kind of health issue, you have God's designed the body to do this in a situation where you sin and won't, have confessed sin. You won't bow your knee to God. Your body is basically like a bank account. If you put good things in, then you've got some good things waiting for you. If you put bad things in, or you only have debts, then you're in a bad situation. And so you look at your own heart and you can't sleep anymore. That's unconfessed sin. It's like a conscience issue. Let your conscience be your guide, kind of thing. And your conscience is trying to tell you, ding, 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 you're a sinner. You're not confessing your sin. No, no, duh, you can't sleep. You got to get this right. And I would rack my brain for things like, what in the world what's my unconfessed sin? So fast forward to age 30ish. I get a friend here in Georgia. I'm from Philadelphia. Friend in Georgia says, "Hey, there's this doctor. He's kind of fringe, but he cures stuff that nobody else fixes. Like nobody, all kinds of stories like that. People are desperate for solutions, and I take the adventure. Come down here to Georgia. He's like, I can fix it in 1 month with no medicine. I'm like, I've been on sleep medicine for 25 years. There's no way. It's like, take yourself off of whatever you're on slowly over the next 4 weeks. And in those 4 weeks, we're going to do some left brain, right brain stuff. And simple stuff. I'll tell the story more in detail sometime. But within a month, after 30-ish years, I could sleep just fine. And I thought to myself when it was over, I thought, this wasn't sin. This was left brain, right brain stuff. And yet for all those decades, I had thought, maybe what am I doing to offend God that makes me deserve this? And it's crazy what we do to ourselves. The mental mind games we play with anything that's not going right. It's your fault. It's a sin issue. Clearly, God is right there. You have turned your face away from Him. You turn around. He's right there. He's not. You don't have to go chase Him down. He's just right behind you, waiting for you to turn with love and repentance for your sin back to His arms. And if you're not doing it, because you've turned your face against God, and you're rejecting Him. You're doing something. You're bringing this upon yourself.
Yep.
And boy, that'll mess you up so bad if you let that sit for a while.
Yes. And I had that in two ways. So I had that in, if there's anything wrong with you, but then also as a woman in the church, I was also tasked with men's responsibilities as well. So I could cause men to stumble and I could be a temptation. And if I looked at a man the wrong way or accidentally touched him or talked to him with maybe a flirtatious tone, I could tempt him and cause him to stumble. And how he reacted, he was not responsible for because he is sexual by nature. That's how God made him. So it's my responsibility to make sure that I am being pure in everything I do. And then also had an atheist dad, so that I was, trying to live this perfect life for. So to say that I had mental gymnastics going on in my head pretty much my whole life. It was hard. And then, to never get the help that I needed throughout that time, I definitely put myself through more than I needed to. If my mom would have just taken me to a doctor to get help.
Yeah. You kind of
and now I
am.
Purity. But
that's awesome. I'm glad you got the help. You touched on the kind of the purity culture issue. Mm-hmm. How big was that in your circle of Christianity? Like, and if it was big, what could you describe for anyone else? What does purity culture, or if you call it modesty culture, whatever, ultra virginity protection kind of stuff, promise rings. What was that like for your experience?
Yeah. And we're actually to that point in the story too. So we started going to the new church, and it was a non-denominational church. And at this point, my dad was not going to church with us anymore. It was just me and my sister and my mom. My sister, like I said, she had a different experience with Christianity. My sister was a little more troubled. According to my mom, she acted out a little bit more. And to my mom, that was because she wasn't living for Christ the way that she should. And my sister and my dad spent a lot of time together. And so my mom was pretty sure that my dad was influencing her more towards Satanism, not believing in God. And so there was always kind of a question of whether my sister believed or not, especially when around this time. And so but I was fully on, like, Christianity was real for me. So we started going to this church, and purity culture was extremely taught in this church, which I hear now, talking to other people and their experiences with non-denominational churches, and it seems like mine was a little different. So I don't really know. I don't know if we had the right label for our church or not, but that's what we considered ourselves. And the theme of the church was, we go through the whole Bible. We don't skip anything. So we went verse by verse, starting in Genesis to Revelation, over and over again, and taught.
Were you saying before your church is stricter? Is that what you meant earlier?
I think so, yeah. Okay. Yeah, because from what I've talked to other non-denominational people, it's kind of like a less strict basis of the church. Like, oh, we don't really agree to all these strict rules, so we're going to do our own thing. It seemed like mine was more strict. So I feel like we maybe mislabeled our church. But purity culture was extremely pushed. The women were taught to completely cover up. We were constantly told in youth group and even children's ministry, the idea of purity culture or being pure was taught. And so, we were told that the way we dressed was a factor. And so people would very openly criticize young girls' clothes. I remember one day I had just gotten a new dress that had like spaghetti strap thing or whatever, and I had a cover up, but we went to go play outside because I was a kid, we do that. And I took my cover up off because it was very hot outside, and I was immediately chastised for that and told to put my cover up back on because I was exposing too much of my shoulders and my arms. And I was, 9 years old. So why anyone should have been looking at me like that, I don't know why. And so that was constantly taught. We were also taught to be less vocal when speaking to men, because first of all, women are not supposed to teach men. So I had to be very careful about the way I was talking about things so it didn't come off as I was teaching someone or teaching a guy, even if they were wrong and that's what I was doing. And this was in any situation. So even if we were playing a game, like I had to be, I'm teaching you the rules to play the game, but I have to do it in a way that makes it seem like I'm not teaching you, which is weird. We were also taught, not to, you could never be alone with a guy or have private conversations with a guy. There was a time where we did a mixed boy and girl sleepover. The girls were going to sleep on one side of the church and the boys were going to sleep on the other side. And we left the big room where we were all together, and I had left something in that room, and I went to go grab whatever I had left, and my youth group leader was still in that room. And so it happened to just be the two of us. Somebody else walked in, and he was excused from being a youth group leader for that. And it was purely like I walked into a room on accident, didn't even realize he was in there. So that's how serious we took it.
That's horrible.
Which is so ironic when you then consider how much abuse is going on behind the scenes, because that was also rampant. I knew several girls in our church who were being abused by elders in the church. And instead of addressing these issues and calling the police, as they should have, the pastor and the elders would take the man and they would go pray and he would ask for forgiveness. He never had to ask forgiveness from the girl. And then he was okay after a couple of these sessions. God forgave him because God will forgive you for whatever you do. And so he was okay now. And the girl was told that, there must have been something that she had done. So they, try to go back to the situation beforehand and figure out what you did so that they can teach you not to do it again. So this doesn't happen to you. And then she was told that because God is such a loving God, that this man asked for forgiveness and God forgave him. So she needed to be like Jesus and forgive him too. And so these girls continued to have to go to church and see their abusers. One of them, the same guy, did it to her 3 times before somebody else stepped in and called the police. And he was finally dealt or had consequences.
It speaks so much to the way the patriarchy. I mean, that's just. I'm doing different research projects on this, and it's not by any stretch my focus, but it does come up so obviously in different stories you hear, and it's very prevalent now with the Southern Baptist Convention stuff that they're going, with they're bringing things to light, and yet a lot of pastors are saying, this was wrong, you shouldn't have brought all the stuff to light, and they're trying to shut it down. And there's good people, good men in this, in leadership saying, if we're going to be godly men, and obviously that doesn't mean anything to me anymore, but if we're going to be godly men, we have to be honest with what's happened with the abuse. And there's men that are honestly saying, shut up, like, don't talk about this. This is not right. And they're defending the patriarchy, and it's just adding fuel to the fire. I mean, they're digging their own grave, in terms of the church. Like, you're making it worse, and you think you're going to get away unscathed, and you're not. You're clearly showing your colors. You're bad men who like a lot of power. And the idea, just the very idea that men or any church leadership would defend the victim, would defend the person, that the perpetrator, and attack the victim and say, it's your fault. You're showing too much skin. You were too flirtatious. Whatever. You're too whatever you're doing. You weren't wise enough to not walk into the room at the wrong time. You weren't supposed to be alone with the guy. And there's so much to unpack there. I don't want to diverge us too much, but if people can't see how dangerous this is, it's like a powder keg. I mean, number one, sex itself is like a powder keg. If you don't do it right, you don't understand it right, you don't have a good education, you don't have good boundaries with yourself, understand your own body. If you get caught up too much in shame culture, where you're ashamed for thinking certain things and everything is like lust. I'm such a horrible person. And all kinds of ways you can get messed up with this. But you see, when you start doing secrets, the secrets where people are like, don't tell anybody what I did. This is a secret between us, or the church. You get to a point where all these secrets, you think you're fixing the problem, and you're just burying it. It's going to come back to bite you bad. And you see it with the Duggar situation and a lot of other cases. And you can hide stuff for so long, like Ravi Zacharias, but it's going to come back to bite you. And when you treat people's sexuality this way, where on the one hand you're nasty as hell to the people that aren't straight heterosexual Christians just like you, and then to the rest of the group that looks kind of like you, you as a church are saying, you girls are you're responsible for the men, and if you do anything apart from this party line, you're basically a temptress. I mean, that's what they're calling you, a temptress, just by virtue of the fact that you've got curves. And it's like, you set people up for this. And number one, a lot of them have a very tough time getting married and then having fun, because you told them for so long, don't think about it. Certainly don't touch yourself. Don't be alone with a guy, whatever. And then you're supposed to suddenly get married and have so much fun. And yet, ironically, and this is what I wanted to ask about too, is ironically, you are in a spot where you're supposed to kind of, like, you're supposed to, in many of these churches, have a lot of kids. Like, you're supposed to be very, very focused on outbreeding the pagans, you might say, but just having a quiver full of kids. Did you have that? Like, what were the gender roles like for you, and what were your expectations for what you were supposed to do as a woman? Like, what was the best life for you going forward if you had remained in that group?
Yeah, the best life for me would have been to get married to someone in the church, have as many kids as I could possibly pop out, be a stay-at-home mom to raise those children, homeschool the children to make sure that they got the best education, And not have a career ever, because the man is supposed to be the head of the household and the woman is supposed to be at home. It was definitely the stereotypical gender role, and we definitely took the go forth and multiply Bible verse very seriously. Most people in my church would have considered birth control to be the same as abortion. So we were taught that it's not necessary, because if you're having sex with your husband and you have a baby, you're supposed to. That's what God wanted. And if you're not married, you shouldn't be having sex anyways. So the idea of birth control was not something that we encouraged. I was actually taken out of sexual education courses in school. So I think in 5th grade, we were supposed to do a puberty video where you watched what was going to happen to your body, the boys watched what was going to happen to their body, and then there was a video that you were supposed to watch together, so that you learned a very little bit about the opposite gender as well. I did not get to go to any of that either, because they did start to talk about like a little bit of sexual stuff. But my mom also didn't have those discussions with me instead. The idea was, I don't want the school to teach you about sex, but then she never did either. So I actually didn't know anything about sex, and to the point of I didn't even know that, what intercourse was. I had no idea what that was. So the first time that I did end up having sex, that was extremely traumatizing for me, because I had no idea what was happening. And it was a bad situation anyways. I was not prepared to have sex, and I wasn't comfortable with it either. I just didn't know I could say no, because I was not given any form of sexual education. And everything that I had heard growing up was women really didn't have a lot of rights. So the idea of you're here to please your husband was definitely enforced. And so if your husband wants to have sex with you, you don't have a choice. Like, you owe that to him, because he's taking care of you and your family. So even though I wasn't in a relationship at that time, and I knew that that part was wrong, I still didn't understand that I had rights as a person in a sexual relationship, in a sexual encounter. I did not understand that both parties should enthusiastically consent to what they're about to do. I didn't know that you could say or change your mind at any point if you started to feel uncomfortable. And so these things led me to very scary situations as I got older and started to have a sexual life. Because I just didn't have the education. I also was not taught about, sexual diseases and how to prevent those. I wasn't taught about how to take care of your body. I definitely was taught that if you masturbated, that was a sin. You absolutely could not partake yourself, which kind of gives you a dirty feeling about your body. So that has been hard to overcome for me. And yeah, even with my husband, it's just hard when you are told that sex is basically here for you to procreate, and that's really the only reason for it. And almost even if you do get pleasure out of it, you're enjoying it too much, and now it's becoming a sin. It's hard to view sex as a great thing after that.
And can I just go back to what you said earlier about the marriage thing? Like, you're supposed to just be focused on your husband, and if he's in the mood and you're not, so to speak, the man's supposed to just kind of push the point, and the woman's supposed to do whatever he wants. And obviously, we can talk. That's related to patriarchy and gender roles that are very clearly defined in the church, but it leads in some cases to even like a marital rape situation where you're talking about you're grooming men to be aggressive in an inappropriate. I mean, we all have ways we're supposed to be aggressive in life. Aggressive for your job, aggressive for your creativity, aggressive in that race. But aggressive when you're talking about crossing someone's boundaries is a completely different thing. And men are kind of they're kind of taught to respect women, but they're kind of also given this carte blanche to, like, your sex drive is so much more powerful than a woman's. And for a lot of people too, they kind of use this idea of like, well, if you're lusting as a single person, then the answer is obviously it's better to marry than to burn, so you need to get married. And a lot of people end up getting matched with someone because they really want to get laid. And
Yep.
it's like that doesn't equate to whether or not you're a good fit. Yes, you can fit together physically, but just because you're horny as hell does not make you a good fit. And because you both happen to be in the same church, you both happen to have the same group of people, you both happen to love the same Christian songs, and yes, you can get married and have sex. Now that doesn't make you a good fit at all.
No.
And people get deceived by this, and then they're matched with somebody that's like, we the only way we fit together is biologically, but otherwise we don't match.
Mhm.
And it's crazy to me that between just the general bad dynamics, like what I just said, but also the you get to the extremists, like the marital rape situations. And I think there's some states even to this day potentially where it's like that's not really, like, if a wife says my husband raped me, it's almost like a what? Like, is
Mhm.
what do you mean he raped you? He's your husband. He's allowed to
Yeah.
do whatever. It's like, come on, we're talking about stuff from like Bronze Age stuff here. It's time to wake up. You don't violate people's um, autonomy, and yet we're not that far from a Bronze Age mentality on this stuff. We're really not.
No, no, not at all. And yeah, even I mean, women around here would defend that. If I were to ever experience that and try to tell someone around me, they would not believe me and would think I was trying to look for attention because
Yeah.
that's what everyone does when they have issues and talk about it. They're looking for attention
And that's what's
around
crazy.
here.
You do hear stories where the churches attack the victim.
Mm-hmm.
They go for the jugular. I mean, it's not even like
Oh
joking.
yeah.
They're just like, you are absolutely the bad girl here.
Yep.
It's horrifying.
Absolutely.
Hmm. Well, what happened
Yeah.
next in your story?
Yeah, so we were going to this church, and this is the church where I went for most of my church experience. So I got very involved in this church. We were there pretty much every day, sometimes multiple times a day. Like when Sundays, we'd be there for morning service and night service. We would go every Wednesday night, and then we'd have Bible studies throughout the week. On Saturdays was my youth group day, and we would generally do some type of volunteer work or helping out on that day as well. So I was constantly, everything I was doing was church related, and I was pretty good because I was so enthusiastic in my faith and I truly believed that God was real. It was easy for me to talk about, and I was this bright, smiley little girl who loved to talk about Jesus, and people would listen to me. So my church started to really push that I was here to evangelize to people. So I went to I joined an organization called CEF, which was Child Evangelism Fellowship. And basically the idea was they would take teenagers to camp in Rapid City, and they would teach us how to put on a VBS for small children. And then we would go into neighborhoods and we would ask families if we could host a VBS in their backyard. And they would invite all of the kids in their neighborhood to come to this VBS. And then we would come and we would set up, and for a week, we would host a VBS in their backyard. And we would provide snacks, and we'd do a craft, and then we'd do a Bible story. And then at the end, we would ask if anyone wanted to accept Jesus. So I went to this camp, and I was being taught how to spread the word of Jesus. And, camps are fun because, again, they're meant to be fun. You're around a bunch of people, you're doing all these things. You have these worship services where, I don't care who you are. If you're in a room full of people and everyone's sitting there singing and lifting their hands and praising, that you feel a connection. There's a feeling of adrenaline, and a rush that you feel. And when you're told this whole time, can you feel Jesus moving through the room? I can feel him. You're like, oh, okay, this feeling, I feel it too. This is God. So all of these things kind of reinforce like, okay, yeah, yep, I am Christian. I am experiencing God. This is real. And I kind of became even more convinced. And so I would try to go to as many of these seminars or groups or camps as possible, because I loved these feelings that I was getting when I would go to these places. And then I would come home and I'd, wind down, and it wasn't quite the same. And so I was constantly looking for these feelings of just elation, basically. Such joy that I was like, this has to be the joy of God. This is what I'm looking for.
We used to call it the mountaintop experience.
Yeah. And so, I did these VBSs and I had great success. I had so much fun. I do have a passion for children. That is something I have always had. So I've always enjoyed spending time with them and talking to them. And I really feel for kids in difficult situations, because I grew up in a difficult situation and I understand. For a long time, at this point in time, I still felt in that situation almost too, because my parents were fighting all the time. My dad was a Satanist, and things just weren't how I thought they necessarily should be. And so to be able to connect with kids and try to do anything I could to help them really gave me happiness. And so I found that joy helping kids. So then I started doing youth ministry at my church, because I knew how to talk to kids about God. I clearly had experience doing it. My church was already saying that I needed to start practicing this more. So they encouraged me, and I joined the children's ministry, and I started leading like the worship services and leading classes sometimes, and I would do mentoring one-on-one with students, and that was probably like my happiest time in church, just because I was helping. Like I actually felt like I was doing something, and I was seeing improvements in kids' attitudes and in the way that they were looking at their life. We were right next to the JDC. At this point, we had moved into the JDC building, the old JDC building, and the new one was right behind it. So we would go to the fence that was between the JDC building and the church, and we would talk to these kids that were over there when they would come outside for outside time or whatever. And so I was constantly talking to kids at JDC about God, and I would get them to say the prayer, and I'd be so happy, because that's all it really was. As soon as I got someone to say the prayer, like that's a notch in my belt. I'm good. I no longer have to worry about you. Like, who cares if you go on to live your life for Christ? I got you to say the prayer.
Could I ask, would you have said that in that environment that there was a sense of, if you don't preach the gospel clearly as much as you can, that their blood is kind of on your hands, like you're responsible.
Yep.
Like you can't not say something. It's kind of like if you had for some premonition, magic way of knowing that, in the next 10 seconds, this kid that's just standing on the sidewalk is going to get killed because there's going to be a drunk driver who's going to come up on the sidewalk and hit him. And if you could magically know that, and you have 10 seconds, well, you're now responsible to go race and to use your 10 seconds to get that kid to safety. And it's kind of like, well, it's that, but on steroids. And you're not talking about, one person. You're talking about millions and billions of people, and you're not talking about a car where it's, it's an accident and now it's over. The person died. You're talking about ongoing, forever torture.
Yeah.
There's so much at stake here, and it's the blood's on your hands if you don't take the gospel out there. Is that fair to say?
Oh yes, I definitely felt that pressure, which was harmful with my relationship with my dad, because I felt it was my responsibility, and definitely affected the way that I talked to people on a day-to-day basis. So I was extremely judgmental, because we we taught the Bible word for word, and we believed everything that it said. So homosexuality was a sin, uh, whatever else. I was judging people constantly based on what the Bible said. So even in school, I wasn't very well liked because I was constantly telling all of my classmates what horrible sinners they were and how they needed Jesus. Surprise, surprise, people don't really like to hear that very often. Don't like to be told they're evil at heart. So my experiences at school were not great, which also really pushed me more towards the church because the church was more accepting of who I was as a person. And at school, I was constantly being made fun of for my beliefs, which also fit into this narrative of being persecuted as a Christian.
Yeah.
So it kind of all, and of course, my grandma and my mom would put these correlations in my head. So, that's why I had more friends at church than I had at school. And that's why I was getting bullied at school. It couldn't be possibly because my mom was keeping me from learning, real things. I didn't know what was going on in current events. So people made fun of me for that. I didn't know, I wasn't allowed to watch PG-13 or up movies. So I didn't know what anyone was talking about when they talked about new movies coming out. Wasn't allowed to listen to music besides Christian music. So we would go to the gym and our teacher would play 104.7, which is our secular radio station. And I would have no idea what songs were playing. And everyone else would be singing. And actually, also didn't win me any brownie points. I went home and told my mom that we were listening to this radio station, and she immediately called the school and told them that that was not appropriate music for kids to be listening to. And my gym teacher made sure that people knew we couldn't listen to it because my mom had called the school, which actually happened a lot. My teachers did not like my mom. She was extremely aggressive in the way that she came off, and she was constantly calling the school to criticize. So I understand why they didn't like her, but I kind of got put in a hard situation because they didn't handle it appropriately either and would continuously blame me in front of the class, like, oh, Jade can't listen to this, or Jade can't watch this movie, or Jade has to leave the classroom now so we can do this, which also put up a divide between me and my classmates.
Yeah. That's sad to hear. I'm sorry you went through that.
Oh, thank you. No, it there was one girl who she was just the sweetest girl, and she was friends with me no matter what, and she would listen to me spout my nonsense and didn't take it to heart. And she kind of was how I got through being in school. Unfortunately, the year that I got taken out of school, my mom agreed to let me have a sleepover, which was not something that got to happen very often because she didn't trust what other people did in their homes. And it was also very commonly taught that what we did invited or could invite demons into your home or into even you. They could like attach to you or whatever. And so my mom, thought, oh, well, if they have a Ouija board in their home and you don't know about it, you can go and bring a demon home. So she didn't let me go places very often. But she did.
You couldn't play video games either?
No, we didn't play video games. Pokemon was demonic. Yeah. Lord of the Rings was demonic. Harry Potter was demonic. Everything was demonic.
I was gonna say our big one was don't touch Dungeons and Dragons, whatever. I still don't know what that is. I've never seen it, but I remember hearing a lot. Don't touch Dungeons and Dragons. That's the one that'll get you.
Yes, we believed in all of that too. So I did get to go spend the night at this girl's house, and she made the decision to sneak out that night because her mom was not near as strict as my mom, and she did this regularly. Her mom basically knew she was sneaking out, but she wasn't really sneaking out. And so I went with her because I was at her house. I wasn't just going to stay at her house by myself. Throughout this night, I had one sip of a beer. Someone took a picture while I took that sip. I immediately threw up because it was disgusting. But that we ended up getting caught while being out late at night. My mom found out I had a drink, and that was the end of sleeping over at people's houses and my public education. To be fair, it was partially me who wanted to be taken out of school because this situation had been so blown up. People started saying that I got pregnant that night. They started saying I got drunk that night. Like, the stories just escalated way past what actually happened. And so I was really embarrassed. And then, my mom had found out and made a huge deal in front of everyone as well. So it was a very public thing. My one time of sneaking out and doing something wrong became this whole town situation. And I was extremely embarrassed, and I didn't really know, I was already bullied at school and picked on at school. I didn't want to go through what I thought was going to happen this next year. So it was kind of a mutual thing. Like, my mom said, I don't really feel comfortable with you going to school anymore. I think I want to homeschool you. And I said, okay, yes, let's do it. Unfortunately, my mom worked as well, though, still. So she wasn't able to stay home and homeschool me. So I ended up staying with my grandma, and she was a 5th grade teacher. And I ended up being like a student helper with her for 2 years. And, I loved being around kids. I loved helping kids. So this was probably the greatest 2 years of my life. The being in the school part, the being able to help children to actually see a difference, because there was one student in particular that I helped with who had fallen behind in reading. And so he was in 5th grade, but he was at a 3rd grade reading level. And by the end of the year, he was up to a 5th grade reading level. And that was because him and I, spent hours every day working on reading. And so, I choked up at the end of the year because he had improved so much. And him and his mom gave me a hug when on the last day of school, because they were so thankful. And I actually got to make a difference. And there were many examples of that. Yeah, hands down, that part was the best. But during that time, I lived with my grandma, and my parents were really fighting at this time. And so it was kind of easier to stay with my grandma as well. But it left my sister at home with my mom and my dad. And so there was kind of some resentment there because she was dealing with their fighting, and I kind of just got to leave it. And so that summer, she actually came and stayed with me at my grandma's house. And this is when Mara and I both kind of started questioning our faith and really this is where, like, it got to the point where I was like, all right, I have been doing everything you've been asking me, and I have had such a shitty life. I don't understand it. And so I was starting to get angry with God, and I knew he was there. I knew he was real. I 100% believe that still, but I was angry. Like, I'm doing everything you've asked. I have no friends. Not any real friends. I've been going through all of these ridiculous situations, and I just don't get it. And so that summer, my sister and I met a group of boys, and they convinced us to sneak out with them one day. And my grandparents were super old. They live in a huge 3-story house in a small town. And so we slept in the basement, and they slept on the top floor. So it was super easy to open our window and sneak out. So this became a habit, and we were sneaking out almost every night to go hang out with these boys. And I mean, we would just ride our bikes around town. There was a cemetery just a little bit outside of town, and we would go hang out there because the police didn't come out there and we wouldn't get caught. But that was probably the funnest and closest me and my sister got, because it was just fun. There was no motivation behind what we were doing. We weren't talking to these boys about God. We weren't trying to convert them. It was nothing God related. And we didn't have that anywhere else in our life. And so, you know, there was a whole summer of sneaking out, hanging out with these boys, but our attitudes also started changing because we started listening to this radio station we weren't supposed to in secret. So we started having more exposure to that. We were watching TV shows that we weren't allowed to watch late at night when my grandparents were sleeping, so nobody knew we were doing these things. And we started actually seeing, like, okay, not everybody lives this extremely secluded life that we have, and this life of constantly being worried about the rapture coming and constantly being worried about the government coming in and saying you have to deny Jesus or you're going to die. You know, these were all very real fears that I had that could happen any day. And so it started becoming an issue, me and my sister's attitude. And we started, we had a youth group at my church. We were obviously all the same age, and it was a group of 4 girls and 2 boys. And we were all really, really close friends. But we were all a very dysfunctional group of teenagers because we all had grown up in the same situations. And so we all were messed up in our own ways. You know, one of the boys was gay, but he couldn't come out and couldn't talk to anyone about it. But we did have these talks in private. And, you know, my sister then started expressing to me that she was also interested in women as well as men. And, you know, I was horrified. And we all, the reason I say it was a dysfunctional group is because we were talking about these things that we were experiencing, and we were talking about these things that we were struggling with, and we knew it was wrong. And so we were talking to each other about how to change these things that we were experiencing. And so we were talking to each other about, you know, what are we not doing right? What are we supposed to be doing? We constantly tried to find volunteer opportunities to make up for whatever we were lacking. And so it was kind of a group of us saying, like, hey, we're not experiencing what all these other people are. Here's our issues. Like, what are we doing wrong? Let's all work together to figure out what's wrong with us. Which, I mean, I don't talk to any of those people anymore besides my sister. But I can definitely say that I would not have gotten through without them either. Like, as much as we were dysfunctional and we were trying to solve each other, it was validating to find out that it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me that was having these doubts and having these questions. But our church became extremely worried about it because they started to see, like, if one of us did something wrong, the whole group was blamed for it because we kind of became responsible for each other in our church's eyes. And so we had to keep an eye out for each other. And if one of us did something wrong, then the rest of us weren't encouraging them enough to Christ. And so it's just always this burden placed on you to be responsible for other people. And I got the brunt of it because I was the most put together out of us. Like, I was the closest one in my faith, according to the church. And I had this experience with talking to people about God, and they kind of considered me like the leader of this group. And so my youth group pastor was constantly messaging me and talking to me about, you know, what's going on? What are you guys talking about? How's everybody doing? And so it was kind of this, like, I want you to keep an eye on them for me and report to me what's going on, so I know that you guys are all okay. And it, you know, it was this idea of it's for your guys' protection that you spy on them for me.
It's like they could sense it was unraveling.
Yeah, I do kind of think so, because then I kind of, you know, I just kept getting more and more angry at these situations. There was a guy in the church that my church wanted me to get together with ultimately, because we were both enthusiastic in our faith. We both loved to talk about it, and they thought it would be a good match. And then when he decided to get with somebody else after courting me for a short period of time, didn't tell me that he was done courting me, just decided he wasn't going to anymore and started courting somebody else, the church took his side and blamed me for the whole situation somehow. And so for a while, that really messed with me too. Like, you guys encouraged me to do this. You pushed this relationship, even if I didn't want it. And then when he just ghosted me, that's okay too. Like, okay. And so they started becoming more, my youth group pastor especially started becoming more aggressive with me. So my mom had me out of marriage, and my sister too. They got married the year my sister was born. And my youth group pastor told me, you're going to have a baby outside of marriage. That's what's going to happen to you, because your mom did, your grandma did, your great grandma did. You're not making decisions to change this, so this is what's going to happen to you. And he said that to me many times. And so it was constantly trying to prove him wrong as well. Like, I'm not this bad person you think I am, it was too much. And it got to the point where I didn't know what was real anymore, because I was pulled in so many different directions of things being my fault, of not being my fault, of being responsible, of not being responsible. Just constantly questioning everything I was doing. And I lost it.
Would you say that he was portraying that as like a generational curse kind of issue?
Yes.
Like, no one's breaking the sin cycle, and you're obviously not breaking it yet. So the doom that's involved in that, and the sense of like number one, if you really believe in the power of God, and if God's living in your heart and the word does not go out void, it accomplishes what he wants. If you really believe that he who began a good work in you will perform it, perfect it till the day of, or complete it till the day of perfection, if he's really doing this great work in you and the Spirit's inside of you, where's the power? That it's amazing. I've seen so many cases in my own experience and in other people's where it's like, you got to ask, do you actually believe this thing has power?
Right.
If this is the real God of the universe, we're not talking about some demigod that's fighting another demigod. We're talking about the God who controls everything, the King of Kings. He's at work in your heart, and yet he can't help you with this. He can control all the stars and all of history, but he can't control this little teeny generational curse thing. It's amazing the way that they try to put these things together and still profess a faith in God. And boy, what a mind job too for you. Like, and especially like whether you get pregnant out of wedlock or not, like, what a mind job on you of you're put in this spot where you're number one, kind of being shamed, whether it happens or not. You're being shamed in advance, and number two, this whole sense of like, you're shipwrecking your life, like you're messing up your life, and all you're doing is you're actually becoming human. You're humanizing yourself in a way that they wouldn't let you do. You're thinking thoughts for real for the first time. You're leaving the matrix, and you're saying, what's life really about? And they're kind of shunning you, slowly starting to pressure you to say, cut it out, stop thinking for yourself, think God's way. And it's amazing, that dynamic. I've seen it so many times.
That's exactly what it was. My mom even started becoming extremely concerned about my relationship with Christ. And so we started having like daily talks where she would ask me, what are you going through? What are you thinking today? And I would tell her what I was going through, and then she would bring it back to Christ somehow. And so I was constantly, without realizing it, I was teaching myself to have my mom's opinion on everything, absolutely everything. If I had a question on anything, I would go to my mom and look for her response. And so that shaped my views on everything in my life: politics, marriage, relationships, and my Christian faith. And that continued up until this last year, actually. So I started, we started having attitudes and started questioning things, and it just became more and more. And so at this time I was about 17. My sister was 16. A couple in the church had they owned a house that had a house above it that they rented out, like in the attic or whatever, and it had become available. And at this time I was working with a guy in our church. He had gotten me a job at McDonald's, and I lived 45 miles outside of town. So every morning I had to drive, 50 minutes into town to go to work, and I worked at 6 o'clock in the morning. So it was just a really long drive, and I was having to wake up really early. So they suggested that I move into this apartment above their house because, they lived below, so they could still keep an eye on me and I'd be closer to my job. And my mom agreed, which the only reason she agreed is because it was above their house and they could keep an eye on me. And so I was able to move into this little studio. I had a job at McDonald's, and one of my managers really started to take an interest in me. And at this point, I had never had a boyfriend besides the short little courting thing. And I was so, that's what I was told my whole life was meant to be, was to find a husband and become a mom. So that's what I was constantly looking for. Like, I was not concerned about school. I wasn't concerned about getting a career. I was looking for a husband, and I was ready to have kids at 17 years old. Like, that's my life's purpose. So this boy started paying attention to me. I had never experienced that. I had no sexual education. I had no relationship education besides don't be alone, don't talk about anything that could cause trouble. Basically this stay as far away until you get married, and then you can learn everything about your husband type situation. And so I got caught up.
Which, by the way, is such a good idea.
I know, right? Such a great idea. Nothing can go wrong by not knowing who you're about to marry. So I really enjoyed his attention. It was all new for me, and he took advantage of it too. Like, he knew. Everyone I met knew how innocent I was and how much I did not know about real life. They joked about it constantly, which was also not very easy for me. Like, people constantly commented on what I didn't know and how naive and innocent I was, and that sucked because then people also took advantage of it. And so we ended up in a relationship somehow. I don't even really know how that happened. And he was the first person that I had sex with. He was the first person that I kissed, my first everything. And it was great. I was loving my life. But my family did not like this. And so it didn't take very long. I think I had moved into this apartment and was living there for a month. And one night I didn't come home because I was actually staying at a girl's house, one of my friends, but I didn't come home. And my mom drove past my apartment that night just to check on me, saw that my vehicle wasn't there, tracked down my car to the girl's house that I was staying at, and told me that I had to move back home, that I could no longer live in my apartment, and I was clearly not responsible to live on my own, and I needed to come home. I was going to quit my job and basically go to church to be saved. Like, I'm 24/7 in church, people praying over me. That's what my life was going to be like, and I knew it. So I argued with her, told her I was absolutely not coming home. Like, you already let me move out on my own. I'm on my own. And the fight got escalated to the point where my mom punched me. And so I called the police because I didn't want to go home. She did hit me. I had a mark on my eye. Like, I figured this is a shoo-in. The police came, and they told me I had to go home with her. Even though I had my own apartment, was living on my own and all of that, I wasn't emancipated, so I had to go home with her.
Wow.
So the whole ride home, she was telling me, you're quitting your job, I'm taking your car, I'm taking your phone, you're not going to have a life anymore, we're just going to be in church. And I was panicking. Like, here I've had this little tiny bit of freedom. I was not about to lose that and go back to the life that I had. So I convinced my mom to let me go to work the next day. I told her, I want to be responsible. Please take me to work. You don't even have to let me drive myself. Take me to work so I can tell them I have to quit. Let me finish out my shift. And she agreed. She thought it was great. I wanted to be responsible. She respected that. So she said yes. So I went to work the next day, told everyone what had happened, which they already knew because the girl who I was staying with also worked at McDonald's that night. And I was in her house when my mom punched me, so she knew what happened. So they already had everything planned out for me, and I left my job with a friend of mine there, and I ran away. My mom went to pick me up that night, and I was not there, and nobody that I worked with would tell her where I went. So for about a year and a half, I was a runaway. Unfortunately, I also stopped talking to my dad and my sister during this time. I wasn't really sure how my dad was going to respond to everything. I wasn't sure how he would feel about it or if he would make me come home. So I didn't even risk it. And I just vanished. During this time, I first didn't have a place to stay. So my manager let me stay at her house for like a week, but then she got worried because my family was constantly going into McDonald's asking about me. So I started going to different people's houses that worked at McDonald's. They would kind of just pass me off to people's houses, which, I mean, super thankful for people who helped me out during that situation. Some of them I should not have been in, though. Some of the people whose homes that I stayed in, I would not have in any other situation. And as a 17-year-old naive girl, that it was not always the best. So then I got pregnant, or I ended up staying with my boyfriend. His parents agreed to let me move in. I ended up pregnant, and at that point, I had to talk to my mom because I knew nothing about being pregnant either, and I didn't know what was going to happen. I was terrified, but I was excited to have a baby. Like, I was going to have my child. I just was scared. So I did finally reach out to my family. My dad was super excited. My sister was super excited. They both were ready to support me. My mom and my grandma said, you should give her up for adoption. And that was heartbreaking as well. That's not something that I was even considering doing. And because I chose not to, they said that they would not help me during my pregnancy because they wanted me to understand how hard it was to be a parent and how hard it was to have a child. So they were not supportive of me throughout my pregnancy either. They were not there when I had my daughter, but came afterwards. And then
that's crazy.
Even years later, I think Bella was 3 years old, and I had made a comment to my mom, aren't you glad I didn't give her up for adoption? And she said, that's why it's the hard choice, because it's the better choice, but it's hard. And so she still thought that I should have given up my daughter for adoption, even years later, and having been in her life for 3 years. So that was kind of devastating as well. But throughout my time as a mom, the church at first fully supported me, surrounded me, said they needed to help, a single mom and her child. They wanted to make sure that I was raising Bella as a Christian. They again tried to lead me into a relationship with a man who had gotten divorced. And Then his ex-wife found out and wanted to reconcile. So again, without talking to me about anything, he stopped talking to me to reconcile with his wife. And the church fully supported it and said he absolutely had to try to work things out with his ex-wife if she wanted to reconcile. That's what the Bible said. And they told me that I had no reason to be upset about this situation. And I left. That was kind of the last straw for me. Like, you guys are telling me this is what God wants you to do. This is what God, oh, never mind. God actually wants him to go do this. So you have a different plan for your life, I guess. And it was constantly this up and down, being told what to do. And I was like, I'm done.
God was a moving target.
Yeah. So at that point, it was, I'm done with churches, though. It wasn't God. It was just church. I didn't like churches. And so that, yeah, I met my now husband at a place that I worked because I was a single mom. I had to work 2 jobs in order to, one for daycare, one for living. And then one of my jobs I got was with my now husband. He was amazingly supportive. At the time, he had a girlfriend, so we were just friends, and he loved my daughter, and she would come into work all the time because sometimes I had to have her with me just for a couple hours because of babysitter situations. And he would play with her, and they had a great time. She loved him. And we were friends for probably 3 years before we finally decided, let's give this a try. And now, we're 5 years later and we're married. But he was, he didn't know where he was. He believed in something, but didn't know exactly what. So he didn't care that I considered myself a Christian. He didn't care if I wanted to raise our kids in the church. And so for a while we did, even though I was mad at the church, I still thought it was important for my kids to learn about God because I didn't want to mess up their eternal salvation. Even though I was mad and questioning things, I didn't want to ruin it for them. So my daughter would still go to church with my grandma and stuff. But that ended up being bad because she started getting these dangerous ideas that I was being told as a child. And the first time that I heard my daughter tell my husband, no, you are wrong. God is real. And if you don't believe him, you will go to hell. I was like, oh no, this is not good. Like, I don't care if people believe that, but I told her, other people don't believe these things. You have to be okay with people not believing them. You can't just say people are wrong because they don't agree with your opinion. And so that kind of really opened my eyes. Like, all right, what message do I want my daughter to have about Christ? So I stopped letting her go to church with my grandma, which caused a huge uproar in my family. But I told them, I want to teach her my way. Like, I'll still teach her about God. I just don't want you guys giving her these ideas. That was bad because then I wasn't going to teach her Christianity the right way. And then the pandemic happened, and this kind of all was at the same time, unfortunately, but kind of gave me an excuse to say, no, she's not going to church now. She is high risk. So we didn't go anywhere at that point. And I wasn't allowing people to come to my house, which my family was upset with because they do not believe that it is real. And then it was her birthday, and they wanted to do a birthday party. So I said, we'll do the drive-by thing. You can wear masks and you can actually like pull up and say happy birthday to her. They were really upset with that. They wouldn't put on a mask to do that, or they didn't want to put on a mask to do that. So that was the last time I actually saw them in person, because I said, all right, if you guys won't put on a mask, we're just going to wait till after the pandemic to see you. And then the election happened. And as we were building up, like I said, my mom wanted me to tell her everything I was going through and all the questions. So I was still doing that with politics up to the election. And I was asking her questions on how she could justify some of the things that Trump was saying. She had terrible answers, like absolutely terrible answers. And so I really started questioning what she was saying too. She wouldn't look at anything besides what the Bible had to say. Like, I would try to send her other stuff that I was looking at, because I was looking at both sides. I was adamantly trying to prove my faith. So I was looking at the biblical side and non-biblical side. She would only look at biblical stuff. And so it got to a point where we couldn't talk anymore because she wasn't listening to anything I had to say. My sister decided that she wanted to come out fully as bisexual. So we had a phone conversation with my mom on that as well. And my mom fully did not support that, believes that it is a sin, believes that my sister will go to hell if she's bisexual, and would not. My sister just asked, please look at some information I want to send you about homosexuality. It's not from a biblical point of view. And I'm just asking that you look at it. And if you can do that, then we can continue a relationship because I know it at least can be a discussion. And my mom said no. And I said, well, how do we have a relationship then if you don't agree with who Mara is as a person? And she said, yeah, I don't think we can, and said goodbye. So I have not talked to my mom or her side of the family since then. It then came out that my family had covered up sexual abuse as well. Like someone in my family had abused another person in our family, and for many years, they did not call the police. They let him say sorry to God and ask for forgiveness, and the other family member was forced to forgive them. Still had to see him be propped up as this amazing man of God. He claims to have the gift of prophecy. He claims to have all this insight, and so my family just thinks he's this miraculous person, but he's a pedophile. Like you can't take that away. And my mom told me that he was no worse than I was because I had sex outside of marriage. And sin is sin, no matter what it is. So he's no worse than I am. And I have a huge problem with that. You cannot tell me that I am anywhere comparable to a pedophile and expect me to agree to that. So that made me angry at the church then too. And so it was kind of all of these things happening at once that made me look at all of my beliefs and start watching atheist YouTubers. I did look at both sides. You know, I was reading my Bible. I was listening to Christian speakers as well. And when you listen to a Christian and an atheist talk, and you listen to all of the reasons why Christians believe what they believe, and then you hear the arguments against it, I couldn't continue believing the nonsense that I had believed for so long. And now I want to fight against it. Like kids and women do not have choices in church. They just don't. Like I know that, you know, bad things happen to men as well, but it's just not the same. Like it's really not. And children especially don't have a choice in what they're raised in. And when you raise a girl to think that her whole point in life is to be a man's helpmate and that's it, and a mom, like she has no self-respect for herself. I did not have any self-respect. I didn't have any sense of who I was as a person. I still don't even know who I am, like the things that I like, the things that I want to do with my life, because for so long it's been, what does my husband like? What does my husband want to do? I mean, at the time it was boyfriend, but you know, that's what you're taught to believe. You're here for two things: be your husband's helpmate and procreate, and that's it.
It sounds like the cards just kept falling apart. Like you know, the where you can take like a deck of playing cards and like stack them against each other and build a little house. It just sounds like things just kept falling to pieces. And you brought up so many different issues that I hope you're going to dive into a lot of them in your YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
But like this is toxic on so many levels. And if people are willing to actually step back from the party line or whatever you want to call it and just say like, let's examine, you know, not just what I did with the, you know, the origin stories of it all and where it's copied from, but just, does this philosophically make sense? Does this really add up? And over and over and over, it just falls apart. And I think that's why people are leaving, and Christians are so shocked. Like, why are so many people leaving the church? Like, this is not about because you were fighting about the carpet. This is not because you're fighting about the hymns versus the worship songs. people are leaving because the whole world, this is a worldview issue. Your worldview doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense of our experience, of our reality, of science. And when you look at, if you just look at the Bible directly, it doesn't make sense of that, the discrepancies and all the issues with it, and the horrible, horrible stories in it. And you get down to it, like the only thing that's really left is this question of, well, I don't know about the Bible, I don't know about this, but I do know one thing. I'm a horrible sinner. Christ is a wonderful Savior. Then you dig into that more, and you're like, that's falling apart too. Maybe we're not sinners. Maybe we're humans, like just like Neanderthals were people that had some sense of conscience. They had to learn to do good choices versus bad choices in the sense of like wise. If I do this, I'm going to hurt myself. I'm going to hurt somebody else. Don't do that. It's not wise. And the people before Neanderthals, whatever, they all had to learn in their environment with their developing consciousness what it meant to live a wise life, a life that doesn't hurt people, that is good for the community. And so you have things you have to learn, but that doesn't make you a sinner. And just learning where the hell story comes from with Zoroastrianism and a lot of the Greek influences with Hades and Tartarus, and all the different ways that hell has evolved to control people, manipulate them, to make them fearful. And you eventually you keep on pulling back the pieces of the onion, and you're like, even the core of it, just the bare bones gospel of Jesus, it doesn't make sense. And especially for me, the thing that adds up, it made the most sense was like, what in the world does blood have to do with this? Why does God need blood? Like, if God's
Yeah.
really in charge, why can't he just say, I forgive you? It's like in the Narnia series, he talks about this character Aslan who has to die on the stone table, and everyone's so shocked that he's dead, but then he comes back to life, and he talks about, oh, but there's a deeper magic from before the dawn of time. Okay, well, if that's the case, God wrote that too, right? He wrote the magic from before the dawn of time. So why doesn't he write the magic rules that just say nobody has to die?
Forgiven.
I just forgive you. I'm just yes, you're making, and over and over. And eventually, once you deconstruct the gospel, the cross, the death and resurrection, on many levels, historically but philosophically as well, you're left with this isn't a relationship with the living Christ. This is a man-made religion, and emphasis on man. It's very much masculine, patriarchal, man-made religion. There's nothing left here. This is not. This doesn't add up. It doesn't make me feel happy. It doesn't make me feel healthy, happy, fulfilled. And I couldn't, like, you can't keep pounding the square peg into the round hole. It doesn't work. Like, this isn't going to ever give you what you thought you would. And it did for a while, because when we're kids we don't know any better. But
Mhm.
eventually, when the part of your brain that's rational kicks in, things start to change, and they're supposed to. Like, this, you didn't leave Christianity, you graduated from it, as they say. You didn't reject it. You evolved out of it. You needed, not you needed, but humanity needed a crutch, so to speak. We needed a way to understand the seasons, the storms, the death, birth. Like, how do we figure out our lives? It was our, as Hitchens would have said, is our first attempt to understand reality, and therefore was our worst. It was our
Yes.
first stab at it, and now it's time to move on to something much, much, much better, which is walk away from man-made religion. And it's awesome that I just want to say, and starting to wrap up here, that I applaud you, because that you didn't um, necessarily emphasize it at every stage, but a lot of those stages, I imagine, took overwhelming bravery. The conversations with your church leadership, the conversations with your family, it's hard. That's some nasty stuff sometimes. Not putting that in your mouth, but just saying, for a lot of people that talk about these stories, there's some nasty stuff where people are left with, they feel like someone kicked them in the gut. And some of this pain, it doesn't go away. The shunning and the ostracization, it's hard. And I want to commend you for being willing to push and take, like, to say, I will push the truth and take the truth wherever I need to go. And if the truth leaves me in Christianity, fine. If it takes you out of it, that's fine too. It's taken more and more people out. But I just thank you for being willing to take the brave route, as opposed to the easy route, which would have been to just say, yes, ma'am, yes, sir, I believe, gospel's where it's at. Jesus is Lord. Praise God. You took the route of investigating and thinking, and saying, does this really make sense? And I'm kudos to you. It sounds like such a hard road, but I appreciate that you took it. What else did we, before we wrap up, what else did you want to share that I didn't ask about your story?
I think we got into most of it. Now I just, like I said, I questioned that whole time. There was always, I was constantly thinking, I'm missing something. Something's wrong, because I was dealing with depression. I still had all these bad experiences coming up. But I, like you had mentioned, there's this fear of even mentioning these questions to someone that can help you and talk to you, people you feel comfortable talking to. You don't want to bring these things up. And that was definitely something that I experienced here, even at 27 years old, coming out of religion. Everyone that I knew around me does consider themselves Christian at the end of the day. Like, if you say you're an atheist, all of a sudden they are heavily Christian. So I have experienced some backlash with that. And, I almost feel like my childhood being a Christian and experiencing being made fun of that way kind of prepared me for this, because my anger is definitely what's fueling me wanting to talk out. But I also my hope is that other people who are trying to figure out what they believe will find my channel. And once I actually start putting more videos out, we'll see that, these are normal questions. These are things that almost every person experiences. And if you can hear somebody else validate those feelings, at least for me, that was so helpful. Like, okay, first off, there's nothing wrong with me. Like, that was so fundamental in me being able to get over this stuff, is realize it's not just me. There's nothing wrong with me. This is normal. And then once you get to that point, then you feel more freedom to look into things. And so I hope to encourage people to get to that point of, it is okay to question what I have been taught. I am not going to be struck down with lightning right then and there because I question God. Because I think that is the most important first step. You have to give yourself the ability to look into stuff, to question without this constant fear of what's going to happen immediately after. And then from there, hopefully break down these other concepts.
Yeah, what a great reminder. Yeah, just that freedom to say I'm allowed to ask the questions, the hard questions. If something doesn't sound right, speak it. Say this doesn't sound right. Maybe it did before, but it doesn't anymore, and I'm allowed to speak up. And I love too that it's clear too that you're whether you're talking about just general overall empowerment or empowerment for women, like, people have voices. People have a way to say, I can, respect that you believe something different, but I don't believe that, and I don't have to. Like, even in a very respectful sense, I could just thank you for telling me what you believe. I believe something different, and I don't have to follow your path. It's so hard for some of us to made such a statement, because we're so used to the party line, which is you cannot get out of line. You must bow your knee. And to have a voice again is so critical. And I hope some people have taken that away from this conversation, that, you do have a voice, you do have a say, and there's a lot, like, whatever you've been told, there's a lot of other ideas out there. You're allowed to think about them. You're allowed to explore them. You're allowed to read. I mean, what a wonderful thing that we live in the world of the internet, where we can explore ideas so easily, so quickly, and share things we're learning. But thank you for your bravery, and thank you for sharing your story. This has been awesome. I look forward to seeing what you come up with in your channel. It sounds like there's some interesting stuff coming in the next few months. But thank you so much for your details here. I feel like we've probably scratched the surface on some of it, but we did hopefully touch on the big points. But for everyone that doesn't know, again, Jade, the YouTube channel is the Jaded Atheist. Is it the Jaded or just Jaded Atheist?
Just Jaded Atheist.
Jaded Atheist. So please go like and subscribe and listen to what she's got, and look forward to the new stuff. But thank you so much, Jade. This has been awesome, and I look forward to doing it again sometime.
Yes, thank you so much. This was great. I enjoyed this a lot, and anytime you want to talk, I would be happy to.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too. Thanks. Bye.